Merlin Tuttle this morning. I have a few short reminders before we get started with our featured speaker presentation this morning. Welcome to day 2. Hope you guys enjoyed all of the presentations that we had running yesterday. A few quick reminders about some of the activities going on today. We have our photo, art, and media contest voting that has opened. We have our project fair entries and the videos that they've sent in, or the video presentations that they did for that online as well. We have our annual award ceremony coming up on Saturday. Don't forget about that. And then our brown bag lunch today is our video presentation of all the first year certifications and our nature reflections video project from this spring. A healthy reminder on some of the tech for today and throughout the conference, if this is your first day joining us, or just as a nice tutorial to get you oriented. Our online event guide is your survival map for the entire week. This is where everything is logged, recorded, shared, posted, and where you can interact with all of our speakers. So bookmark that page, and that's where you're going to go every morning to get started on the event. There's also an app for that. We have our app. That's a great way to connect with the event as well. You can be logged into both the online event guide on your computer and the app on your phone at the same time. Plus, the app has that additional feature to set reminders for the sessions, and maybe you're walking outside at lunchtime and you want to get a reminder when it's time to come back in. So please, oh, I'm moving through my slides, but y'all aren't seeing them because I paused my screen. So I'm going to run back just one more slide real fast. Our day 2 reminders, photo, art, and media contest. This is the tech check that we needed this morning, right? Project fair entries are online. All of this is going to be shared with you guys through that online event guide that I was just mentioning. Here's the pretty picture to go along with that mention. This is your survival guide for the entire week. Don't forget that there's an app, great tool to use. You can use them at the same time as you're logging into your computer. You can have your phone with reminders for those sessions. Again, a healthy reminder as we kick off the day 2 for this event is our virtual meeting room etiquette to ensure that secure and respectful environment in this virtual annual meeting. Please review this virtual meeting room etiquette at every opportunity that you can. Knowing that attendees are not able to unmute, we have built in the Q&A in order to allow you guys to interact with our speakers today. And we do ask for everybody to be respectful in all the comments and questions in that discussion. Lastly, on the screen, if you're having trouble hearing me right now, or if you have trouble hearing the speakers throughout the day, using that audio and video tab up at the top of your screen to toggle your audio connections, that's where you're going to select the right output speaker, the right output volume, and that is the key to making sure that you have the ability to hear your speakers throughout the day. If you're a Mac user, it's in a very similar spot on the top of your screen as well. You'll go to that audio ribbon, speaker and microphone settings to toggle your speaker input, output, and your volume as well. And then last but not least, we do have a WebEx Help Center that is also found on our online event guide. That WebEx user experience, many of y'all who joined us yesterday have recognized that it's a different type of WebEx meeting than you may have been in before, where you cannot see the other attendees, but trust me, they're there. You may not be able to unmute or use your video, but that is to allow for the large quantity of attendees that we have and to have a manageable meeting so that our presenters and our speakers have an ability to share their content with you without interruption. But we do have those that Q&A box to allow that interaction with that speaker. Some things that you may have noticed if you joined yesterday is that our Q&A is running throughout the entire day. So you may need to scroll all the way to the bottom. By the end of the day's worth of sessions, that Q&A box may have previous sessions questions, that's a mouthful, in that Q&A box. So make sure to scroll down to the bottom. And then recordings are going to be posted as available. I'm hoping to get yesterday's recordings posted here shortly, recognizing that they will all be posted by early to mid next week. And then last but not least, how do you use Q&A? This is going to be important for today's featured speaker presentation. Please use the Q&A tool on your WebEx to ask questions and make sure that those questions are being asked to all panelists. Please make sure that those questions are asked in full sentences and are asked clearly so that we can get you the best answer and responses possible. If we have trouble understanding your question, we may not be able to provide the answers that you're seeking. And then again, those question and answer boxes by the end of the day will have all of the previous sessions questions logged in them. So you will need to scroll to the bottom for those. All right, now I ran through that quickly. I understand that, but I wanted to make sure that we had as much time as possible for our featured speaker this morning. So Merlin Tuttle is our featured speaker this morning, and we're so excited to have him join us this morning. He is the founder and executive director of Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation, founded in 2014. He has been dispelling the myths and the fear of bats for years prior to that, of course. And helping to inspire the awe in the natural world. As our previous speaker yesterday mentioned, that inspiration of the awe is important to promote that education and the understanding of our natural resources. And a quick shout out, his wife Paula is also a master naturalist with our Capital Area chapter. So one in the family is always nice. So Merlin, I'm going to pass this over to you. As folks are coming in today, they will also see Teresa Nikta. She is the operations manager with Merlin Tuttle Conservation. And Teresa will be answering questions in our Q&A box as Merlin is talking, and then helping us to prompt him with some of the questions that he'll answer at the end of his presentation today. So again, thank you guys so much. I'm not going to take any more of your time, and we'll get this started. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now. Michelle, will you pass it on over? In that way. I think you're good to go. Thank you so much. You're good, Merlin. Merlin, I think you're ready to go. You've got your screen sharing and you're unmuted.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share a bit of my knowledge of bats with some of our state's most important wildlife interpreters. I really appreciate all you do to help the public better understand the needs and value of our wildlife. As you may have noticed, in recent time, bats have been getting a heck of a lot of bad press. Media stories have claimed, for example, Time magazine, bats are the #1 carriers of disease. National Public Radio, bats are arguably among the most dangerous animals in the world. Wall Street Journal, where will the next pandemic come? Likely from bats. Those stories all came out in 2017, and it's only gotten worse since. But where's the credible science backing these stories? Those headlines were all based on this paper published in 2017, reporting that bats have more viruses than other mammals. Let's look at the credibility of that paper. They compared just 4 of 26 orders of mammals. That's just a small fraction. And worse yet, they examined almost as many bats as they did all other mammals combined. And bats are, I'm sorry, what I mean to say is that only 1% or fewer of the world's viruses have been identified to date. There are so many yet to be discovered that we can find a new virus anytime we want to look right on our own bodies. So when the search for viruses focuses almost entirely on bats, of course we're going to find more viruses in bats. But since then, there's a much better study that was published just this year by Mullins and Stryker, and this one found that if you look at all the orders of mammals and all the orders of birds, there is no difference. Bats do not support more viruses than other animals. But this second paper, of course, wasn't nearly as fun to make scary headlines with, so it's received almost no media attention. Now, with that kind of background story in 2017, we can only imagine how bats got blamed first for COVID. Did it really come from bats? Well, despite all we've heard about that probably did, and those probablys have largely become interpreted in people's minds as actually did, here's what leading scientists have to say. Wenzel, who is a leader in cladistics and statistical analysis of the kind of data that's being looked at, has recently pointed out that inadequate methods in sampling have led to less than credible conclusions of SARS-CoV-2 origin. Of course, SARS-CoV-2 is the causative virus that brings us COVID-19. Not only that, but Zhang and Holmes, who are leading epidemiologists, conclude that it is highly unlikely to jump from bats to humans. The origin remains unknown. Sadly, while the origin remains unknown, the speculation has been so rampant that nearly the whole world now knows that it came from bats. Why would virologists be so prejudiced about looking at bats? Well, the answer is very simple. There's no group of mammals on the planet that is easier to sample quickly in large numbers than bats. You can set a trap at the entrance to a cave, catch hundreds in minutes. They're easy to handle. That results in quick publications, advancement of careers. You can get away with speculating almost any kind of horrible thing about bats, and people don't know any better because they don't know much about bats. The resulting media headlines sell papers and readership. It creates the perfect storm for maligning bats, despite the fact that to this day, there isn't a single case known of a human contracting SARS, MERS, COVID-19, Ebola, most of these so-called emerging diseases, not a single case documented to have been transmitted from a bat to a human. What's my background? Well, I've been looking at bats, studying them intensely, photographing them for more than 65 years. I've followed them into caves where there are millions at a time. I've crawled into crazy holes. I've worked with them in my studio. Certainly, if anyone could have been exposed to a bat disease, it would have been me. Now, like veterinarians and other bat biologists, I am vaccinated against rabies because we who handle lots of unfamiliar animals occasionally get bitten by one, and we don't want to have the risk of contracting rabies. But neither I nor any other bat researcher has ever been protected against any of these so-called emerging diseases that we're now being warned are coming from bats, and yet we're all still healthy. In fact, this story really falls apart when you look at the history of bat association with people. These are straw-colored flying foxes in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Throughout Africa, there are major cities that have hundreds of thousands, even millions of straw-colored flying foxes living in city parks, associating closely with people, having been there for hundreds of years, and not a single case of an outbreak of something like Ebola has occurred in these cities where these bats so concentrate. Ebola originated in the frontier areas and was brought to the cities by people. It makes no sense to blame the bats that have been living with people all along without causing Ebola, but that's just what happened. These bats were the first animals to be blamed for Ebola. Now let's take a look at the real world of bats. Obviously, they're not blind. They each have their own, each has its own unique personality and IQ. Even bats with big rabbit ears can be just as cute as any bunny. Echolocating bats with strange noses can still be interesting, fun to look at. I've been told, I don't know how many times, that people in America, perhaps, people will tell me, maybe I could like bats if only they weren't so blankety blank ugly. Well, let me point out that these handsome dudes are the foremost widespread species of America, and I don't see anything ugly about them. And I know we here in Texas take pride in our state and its denizens. We have one of the world's most spectacular mammals. Spotted bats have pink translucent ears and wings, beautifully designed black and white bodies with long Angora-like fur. We also have some bats that do things that most of us are pretty grateful for. Our pollinating bats that pollinate agave. There are hundreds of species of agave and cactus plants from here all the way down to Chile that are heavily reliant on bats as their primary pollinators and or seed dispersers. The entire production of tequila and mezcal in Mexico could be lost without bats to pollinate the agaves from which they're derived. If you go to Southeast Asia, all ancestral bananas were pollinated by bats. Go to Africa, up to 95% of the first seed rain that falls in cleared land is coming from bats, and this is absolutely critical to reforestation of abandoned farmlands. And yet, today, just because these kinds of bats have been blamed for Ebola, they're being slaughtered in large numbers, completely without cause, and with potentially great damage to the whole ecosystems of Africa. Most of us don't really realize just how dependent we are on products from bats. Some 70% of all of the fruits from tropical areas of the world come from plants that, at least in the wild, depend on bats as their primary pollinators or seed dispersers. Here in Texas, we have special thanks to give to our free-tailed bats. These little guys fly thousands of feet above ground in spring, intercept invading moth pests. Literally billions of these moths invade from Mexico and further south each spring. Just one of our free-tailed bats can catch enough of these egg-laden moths to prevent them from laying 20,000 or more eggs on Texas crops. Texas Parks and Wildlife has estimated that these are worth approximately $1.4 billion annually in Texas. And nationally, bats like this are valued at close to $23 billion annually. If we only had just a little bit more understanding of bats, we'd be lined up to protect them. Now I want to show you another one of my favorite examples of the outcome from protecting bats. It's in Thailand. This is Khao Chong Pron, a Buddhist temple you see in the background. Sells bat guano for fertilizer to support its monks. And 40 years ago, they contacted me and asked my advice. Their guano production was falling precipitously. Why? Well, it didn't take me very long to figure out that at night when the monks weren't looking, the poachers were active. And they were catching huge numbers, tens of thousands of bats, and nets set over the cave entrance. and selling them for people to eat as a delicacy in restaurants. I advised the monks that for a small fraction of what it was of the cost of the losses in guano production, they could hire a game warden to restore their bats. They hired a game warden, and just 10 years later, when I returned, the guano sales had risen from $12,000 annually to almost $90,000. And today, they're exceeding $200,000 US annually. And as the emergences of bats became spectacular, this attracted the curiosity of biologists who came and conducted a study that showed that these bats are worth $300,000 US annually in control of just one major rice crop pest, the white-bellied planthopper. And that's just one of half a dozen pest species that these bats are helping control. Not only that, but as the bats became more conspicuous in their columns that could be seen for up to a mile or more coming out across the temples at night, this started to attract the attention of thousands of tourists. And the local people do a very brisk business, selling everything from bat dolls, t-shirts, bat kites, you name it, to the visiting tourists. I would estimate that if you added all that up, this one colony of bats having been saved from extinction is now worth close to $1 million annually to one small community in Thailand. That's a lot of money in Thailand. I have worked several times trying to get grant money set aside for someone to do a really full economic analysis of just how much value one village has gained from protecting bats. Unfortunately, these days it seems that nearly all the money invested in bat research is going for searches of dread diseases and trying to link them to bats. And so instead of trying to understand better what bats' value can be and what their needs are, we're spending money scaring people about things that have never happened. When I began my work on behalf of bats more than 40 years ago, these are the kinds of headlines that even then were dominating the U.S. press. Back then, it was all about rabies. Oh my God, bat might just fly by you and give you rabies without you knowing it, biting you without your knowledge. Let's look at reality. Only 1 to 2 people per year die of rabies from a bat in all of the US and Canada combined. And those are people who picked up a bat that was sick, got bit, and then didn't tell the doctor and get vaccinated. We have the perfect example right here in Austin, Texas, of how it can be to live with large numbers of bats safely and productively. When our bats first started moving into the Congress Avenue Bridge, the Austin American statesman ran stories like this: bat colonies sink teeth into city. Those kinds of stories went from coast to coast and around the world. Hundreds of thousands of rabid bats attacking Austin citizens. Not only that, but here's a poster from that era. This is how people in Austin were led to believe bats would behave. Public health officials claimed that the bats were mostly rabid, dangerous, and would attack. No surprise, the people of Austin started signing petitions to have our bats eradicated. About that time, I managed to begin my efforts in Texas on behalf of educating people to appreciate bats. And as a result, those bats ended up being protected. Now, take a look at that close association. Nothing faked about that picture. All those people are within 6 feet of a flying bat. This has been going on for decades. Millions of people have come from all over the world to enjoy the sight of our emerging bats. Not one of them has been attacked. Not one of them has contracted disease from a bat. Our bats from the Congress Avenue Bridge simply go out and consume literally tons of pests, insect pests each summer night, and attract millions of tourist dollars each summer. Austin has now become the world center for educating people to the value of living safely and harmoniously with nature, particularly with bats. I'd be remiss, though, if I conclude my talk with leaving you thinking that all is bliss in the world of bats, because just in the last couple of years, it's been concluded that bats are now the most rapidly declining warm-blooded animals of America. Our bats in Texas have been lucky in many cases. We've protected them in Austin, we've protected them at Bracken Cave and a dozen other locations, but they're still at risk. Careless use of wind turbines is killing millions of American bats annually and needlessly. As people fear bats from COVID, they're massively killing bats all the way from Peru to Indonesia and China, Africa, you name it, and becoming a lot less tolerant even here. I won't take much time on this picture, but this picture was taken by me in a bat roost just south of our border in Mexico after an owner sealed it shut with 250,000 bats inside because he'd heard that they might be dangerous. We have clear choices to make. And one of the problems is that we are very often being told that bats are incredibly dangerous. They're being used as the kind of fall guys for scary stories, where we practically ignore the manufacturers of pesticides. Bats can't fight back. Multi-billion-dollar corporations can. It's a lot easier to turn attention to bats. But a recent study, review of 480 studies linking pesticides to human disease, conclude that they're clearly linked to increased cancer, diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, birth defects, and reproductive disorders. So we face clear choices. It's time to reduce pesticide use. We can do it with more bats, or we can just keep using more pesticides and suffer the consequences. I prefer saving the bats. And now I'd like to remind each of you that I have a special warm spot in my heart for master naturalists and people like you who are working to educate the public about bats. And so at my website, at Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation, I provide a large number of resources that I'm sure you'd find very useful. The latest up-to-date science on COVID and where it's coming from, fear of bats and its consequences, rabies in perspective, pesticide addiction, how bats can help, and much, much more. Also, if you're interested in speaking to the public, I want you to know that every picture I've just shown you and thousands more are available on our website for you to download easily in a shopping cart type system so that you can prepare your own talk. And we cover all 33 species of the state of Texas. So there's no excuse to ignore bats. We provide it all, and I know you'll be very interested in sharing your knowledge. Thank you very much, and I'd be most appreciative if you'd consider joining my efforts as a member. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Merlin, for a fantastic presentation. Teresa, you've been doing a fantastic job answering some questions in the Q&A. Are there any questions that you've got marked that you'd like to have Merlin answer verbally?
I'm just scrolling through right now. Thanks, Merlin. I'm sorry, I have roofers in my background, so this is the fun of working from home. But if there's noise, I apologize. I see several in a row here about the wind turbines. I shared our resource, Merlin, but someone said that they've heard that if they switch to one blade, that could reduce kills? Is there a solution for bats colliding with wind turbines? What can be done? So people have a lot of questions about that. I think it's a really apt subject because we all want, quote unquote green energy, but how can we make it more safer? Do you want to talk a little bit about wind turbines, Merlin?
I personally helped found the Bats and Wind Energy Cooperative, where industry was going to cooperate with conservationists to solve bat kills at wind turbines. We very quickly jointly came up with a solution that would have reduced bat kills at turbines by at least 80% with less than a 1% loss of power. Unfortunately, the biggest companies in America, most of them, have failed to initiate these procedures, even though they know of them and are aware. And today, the latest estimate is that we're killing at least 2 million, probably 3 million or more bats annually in turbines in America. Texas, last I checked, had, I think it was at least 12 or 13,000 turbines, and we are one of the least monitored states when it comes to kills. When I first came to Texas and talked to wind energy producers, I was told that there weren't any wildlife issues, that turbines here were located in places where they didn't harm wildlife. But they didn't harm wildlife because nobody was looking for the harmed wildlife. As soon as we started looking, we found that actually our free-tail bats are among the most susceptible to wind turbine kills. And there is much more that could still be done. There are not enough people expressing enough concern, so there's not enough pressure. I'm told that if we would simply be very careful of who we invest in and in making financial investments in energy, we'd invest only in companies that were responsibly disclosing their research facts to the public and implementing what's known that could be done to help wildlife, that just a 5 to 10% change in investments could force companies to suddenly pay a whole lot more attention to conserving both birds and bats at wind turbines.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing those resources as well. Merlin, there's some other questions that have been coming in, and Teresa, if you've got any other questions that you wanted to bring up for him to answer. Some of the questions that have come in are specific to white nose disease in Texas, and would you mind sharing an update on the status of that disease in Texas?
White nose syndrome has been spoken of a great deal in recent years in America, and I can understand that. It has killed millions of American bats. But unfortunately, there is absolutely nothing we can do to stop it or slow it. That's been proven time and again as it sped rapidly across the whole of North America without us being able to slow it down noticeably. We're not going to find a cure. It is way too late for that. The fungus that causes white nose syndrome is now distributed in probably literally billions of bat roosts all over the country. Finding something that could kill the fungus isn't going to do much good because the fungus is already established in so many places where we wouldn't be able to control it. Curing bats individually doesn't do much good because when we release them back to the wild, they get reinfected and they're still susceptible and die of the fungus. The good news is that the fungus that causes white nose syndrome is not killing all the bats. It is killing up to 90% of a few species, and that is terrible. But in the Northeast, where this all started, we're already seeing a return of bat populations beginning to grow as they're rebuilt based on genetically resistant individuals or individuals that have better hibernation sites than others. One problem that I'm very concerned about is how many times we're disturbing hibernating sites just to check and see if they've got white nose syndrome or to find a cure, when in fact, bats that die of white nose syndrome are dying because they're they itch and they have to wake up too many times because, you know, if you've had chiggers, you know how it is to wake up itching. And so the bats, every time they wake up prematurely in hibernation, they're using up to a month's supply of stored fat reserve. So this itching from the fungus is causing them to run out of energy before spring, and they die of starvation. When we go in to study them to, quotes, find a cure or help them, we're just speeding that process. We're causing them to wake up an extra time or two, expend a month or two of extra fat, and up the risk of dying prematurely of white nose syndrome. The bats actually at this point would be much better off if we simply focused our efforts on trying to protect them from as many hazards as possible, try to protect their hibernation sites to the extent possible so that they're not disturbed extra and cost them extra fat reserves when they're already short. If we just conserve bats better and quit trying to find a cure, we'd do a much better job of protecting them and having a guaranteed future beyond white nose syndrome. Our dominant bats in Texas, the free-tailed bats, are probably never going to be consequentially impacted by white nose syndrome. They don't hibernate, and so they don't expose themselves to the same kinds of hazards that kill bats from this fungus.
Thank you.
Thanks, Merlin. I'm seeing lots of questions about bat houses. This is always a big topic. I'll just let you all know that we have a resource called Selecting a Quality Bat House on our page, and we're working on expanding that resource as quickly and as much as we can. So joining MTBC as a member will give you our newsletters, which is just a few emails a year, and you'll get all those updates. But Merlin, if you want to talk a little bit about bat houses, we have questions about, does having a bat house on your property increase chance for finding bats? Can I just get a bat house on Amazon? Would that be sufficient? How to attract bats to your bat house?
We used to think that you had to put up a large bat house to be optimally successful. It turns out, with 20 or 30 years of looking back at what's happened, the biggest bat houses oftentimes take the longest to get occupied. And we're not exactly sure why. It may take longer for a big enough colony to be available to heat them enough. And you'd think bats wouldn't need heat in Texas. God knows we've got plenty of heat. But bats like incredibly warm houses. And my recommendation now is that if you want to get started, put up 2 or 3 small houses. You can build simple ones very easily. Just a half sheet of plywood can be used with a few pine or cedar slats in between the pieces of plywood to make 3 single chamber bat houses, and put them up preferably on a building in differing amounts of sun or shade. The bats really like to have options. They're used to out in nature having dead bark fall off trees. They roost under the dead bark, and in a storm it falls off and they have to suddenly find a new roost. They're used to roosting in snags and woodpecker holes and things. The snags fall down. So they like to know they have options nearby. And those who put up 2 or 3 just simple houses are more likely to succeed than those who put up one Cadillac house that may not be in the right exact amount of sun or shade and may not get used. So, and there's a lot we still have to learn about exactly why bats choose a given location. We can tell you that overall, if you follow our instructions on placement and the quality of the bat house, you've got about an 80 or an 85% odds of success in attracting bats. Now, don't expect it to happen overnight. It may take up to a year or 18 months to attract bats. Now, just recently, I witnessed a situation where someone put up a small bat house and attracted close to 100 bats within days, but that's the exception rather than the rule. We'd like to, over time, better understand why it is that some places where we don't think bats are going to be attracted do attract bats, and places where we're quite sure they will don't. So it's best to experiment with 2 or 3 fairly simple houses and then go on to larger, more expensive ones only when you know that you have an area and a kind of situation where the bats want to live. Bat houses are a big help in reducing pests in your yard. If you have a garden, cucumber beetles, corn earworm moths, armyworm moths, cutworm moths, all these insects are heavily preyed upon by bats. And the moths actually have hearing that enables them to listen for bat echolocation. So if they hear a bat within 100 feet, the moth turns and goes the opposite direction. That's quite the aid if you've got a garden with a bat house nearby.
Thanks, Merlin. I just saw a question that I think this would be good to talk about. Sandy says, I can't wait to share this information with my friends who think COVID-19 came from bats. We have a resource on our site about COVID-19 that has some links to other articles that should help you in discussing this. We also have a blog post which you can sign up to subscribe to our blog and get those emails, but that's good intentions can still leave a bad taste. Merlin, do you want to talk about how to discuss this topic with people and how nuanced the subject is?
Yes, you have to be very careful how you discuss this kind of thing. Some very well-intended people are prefacing what they say in defense of bats with a statement like, it's not their fault that they happen to carry viruses like Ebola and MERS and name off a bunch of scary viruses. We've invaded their habitat, and if we just protect their habitat and not disturb them, we wouldn't have a problem. Well, the real problem for tolerance of bats is that we fear them so much. It's been shown in a recent study that if you want to save bats, it's more important to get people over their fear than it is to extol the virtues of sharing our planet with bats. People are acting mostly out of their fears. So if you start your conversation with, don't blame bats for having these diseases, you've already tripped over your presentation. You're not going to get too far changing attitudes. It's really important that we understand that most of what we think we know about bats and disease is grossly exaggerated hype. For a person who simply doesn't handle bats, the odds of catching any disease from a bat anywhere in the world are extremely remote. You're far, far more likely to die of an attack from a neighborhood dog or even your spouse, God forbid.
This is also, Merlin, if you want to maybe talk about your winning friends, not battles philosophy a little bit.
It's very important that we understand and respect people's fears even when they're totally ungrounded. I've had lots of people tell me stories about bat attacks and similar incidents that are completely unthinkably impossible, but I never tell them that their story is impossible. I first ask them, well, you must have had a really frightening experience. Tell me about it. What happened? Well, this bat chased me and nearly got me, but I just barely got in the house ahead of him. Are you sure that bat was chasing you and not the mosquito that was buzzing around your head? And then you see him start thinking a little bit. I was called to Alabama one time to investigate a mauling where a Tennessee Valley Authority dam worker supposedly had been mauled by bats at work, and he had a mangled surface of his right arm to prove it. When I got there and started asking questions, he realized immediately that I was dubious that the bats had done this, and he almost had to be restrained from attacking me. But in the end, I found that he had reached his arm into a locker where a bat had taken refuge and was trying to hide. The bat was frightened of him, flew out, and it scared him. He yanked his arm out of the locker, and the upper part of it wasn't finished yet. It was like a saw blade, and you could still see his skin clinging to the locker. At that point, he got very angry and had some very unkind words to say for his doctor, who didn't know any better than to believe his story.
There's also videos describing Merlin's Win Friends Not Battles philosophy. If you go to our website and go to gallery and then video library, and so there's videos there about Khao Chang Kran, cave in Thailand that Merlin mentioned, about his philosophy. There's cute videos of a little bat training Merlin. You'll find all sorts of fun stuff there. And as some of you may have gathered, I'm just answering some of these questions with straight up links from our website. We have all sorts of resources on our website. If you go to merlintuttle.org and resources.
Sorry, I got carried away telling stories there and forgot what I was really supposed to be responding to.
I was prompting you to talk about your winning friends, not battles philosophy, and then using that to change the attitudes of people who seem to believe that COVID comes from bats.
Just ask them why they think the way they do, and you know, most of them are going to cite some news medium. And my next question is, do you believe everything that you read in that paper? And almost nobody does. And another thing, when I'm introducing people to bats, I start out with total surprises, like a really cute, winsome bat, and they think bats are all ugly and aggressive. I start out by showing the incredible diversity of bats. They think bats all look like one and they're ugly. Just by showing people that there's, without saying anything about it, just showing them that there's a whole lot about bats that they don't yet understand, that opens their mind to the fact that you might be right about the bat chasing mosquito instead of attacking them.
And Merlin mentioned already, but all the photos that he uses are available on our website. Well, not all of them yet. We're still adding new ones, but we do provide Merlin's photo collection on our website. So you can download those and have them on your phone and just show them quickly to your friends, or use them in PowerPoint presentations, or, you know, reports and kids reports, all sorts of things. So we provide that resource to aid you in being an ambassador for bats. Merlin, someone asked, what's the health of the free-tailed bats under Congress Avenue Bridge? And are they susceptible to white nose syndrome?
I don't believe white nose syndrome is going to be a problem for those bats.
Why not?
They don't hibernate. They don't enter long periods of torpor in cold cave-like conditions where this fungus flourishes. Bats that migrate for the winter and don't hibernate, that go south and stay active year-round, are, so far as we know, rarely, if at all, affected by white nose syndrome.
There's several follow-up questions about wind turbines and how, you know, people are really concerned about this, how to get involved, who to contact, what can actually be done. Because like you said, the solutions are very simple and all they need is to be implemented and managed. But how do we let people know what's needed, or who do we let know?
We have a resource on wind that will tell you what the problems are. And once you know what the problems are, you need to be talking to everybody from Parks and Wildlife Department to, about the needs for better monitoring and regulation. I'm sure they would agree. They do agree. But the problem is they often don't get supported strongly enough to dare go out and do what needs to be done about regulating how wind power is used. You can simply demand to know what the company, if you're using power in part from a certain wind power company, find out what that company's policy is. I've outlined questions that should be asked in our resource. Do you allow access for scientists to monitor mortality impacts? Are you implementing the latest discoveries on how to reduce mortality? Are you open to sharing the findings in a public forum? There are a whole bunch of things, questions that need to be freely asked and accounted for, and we have provided a list of those questions in our wind resource.
This is a fun and maybe short answer. Someone's asking, what are the species that are more uncommon in Texas, like the evening bat? Do you want to talk about the variety that we have in Texas?
Depending on how you count in the latest taxonomy, it's about 33 species we have. That's the most of any state in America, and we're very proud of that. Luckily here in Texas, because bat guano was once the greatest mineral expert of Texas prior to oil, cave owners often recognized the value in protecting bat caves, and so we didn't lose as many bats as other places. Like where I did my early research in Tennessee, the health department announced that the gray bats I was studying could have rabies. True, they could have rabies, but it's also true that in the history of America, we don't know of a single person contracting rabies from that species of bat. But cave owners, armed with that knowledge, went out and poured kerosene into some of actually my research caves and burned whole colonies of thousands of bats.
Thanks, Merlin.
Wait, I just remembered that you got to bring me back if I get carried away on your answers. We have an incredible diversity, not just number of species of bats in Texas. Bats with eyes in their ears, bats with ears as long as their bodies. Bats are beautifully designed. Bats are colorful. Bats that pollinate flowers. Bats that are major pest controllers, and we have bats of all different kinds of behavior too. It's a wide open area for research. One of the problems we face in conserving bats is that I would say 90% of the world's bat species haven't been studied enough to even have a basic idea of what they might need or what their values might be.
Someone asked if you're going to be, they love The Secret Lives of Bats and they want to know if you're doing any other publications. So I did respond and say that you did Bats, an Illustrated Guide. That was of all species, that was published by Smithsonian last year. But I also mentioned the wonderful writings of your dear wife, Paula, and Texas Master Naturalist. She's doing some memoirs. I'm saying this verbally because I don't think everyone else would have seen that, but I think probably most of you would be interested in this. Do you want to talk a little bit about if you're doing any writing, or if you have any plans to share your stories, Merlin? Or tell us a funny story?
You can tell it's dangerous to get me started telling stories.
I know, we have 5 minutes left.
But in those blogs that my wife Paula provided, I was leading expeditions for the Smithsonian way back in the mid to late 60s. And in fact, that's where I got a lot of my basic foundation knowledge of bats. And I'd like to make a point. Many of us who love animals get very emotional about protecting them. And that's one of my cases for winning friends instead of battles. We don't want to be too emotionally involved so that we can't be polite and nice to people who disagree with us. There was a time when I was perhaps the leading collector of bats anywhere in the world. When I worked for the Smithsonian, we collected thousands of bats and other mammals in a single year. And I don't regret that. Those were essential to understanding taxonomy, to understanding, we wouldn't even know what species were endangered and what ones were most valuable and not if we couldn't identify them. But there are certainly people who love bats that wouldn't have been at all pleased to have seen the thousands of animals that we used to collect for museum purposes. But that all set the groundwork. Audubon, Merriam, Roosevelt, some of the biggest conservationists in American history started out as collectors doing things that most of us wouldn't like now. I haven't killed a bat knowingly in a very long time, but you might find it interesting to see how I got started before I was always a conservationist at heart, but I certainly did a lot of things that conservationists might question now. But in also doing that, you'll find linked some pretty incredible stories. I have been hunted by Yanomamo Indians, had my camp attacked by river bandits, was hid from cannibal Indians most of a night in the jungle. They were hunting for me. Had my camp, this is a story yet to come, almost bombed and strafed by the Venezuelan military who mistook us for insurgents one day. There's some pretty interesting stories mixed in there with the collecting, and I hope that it serves to help people see that even those who have done a lot of things that they may not really approve of in their past may indeed be the ones to do the big things in protecting wildlife in the future. Again, I don't frown on collecting with reason needed specimens for museums, but at the same time, I just want to make the point that sometimes those of us who started out as hunters or collectors are protectors. So be kind, and let's have room for hunters and collectors from all backgrounds. We all can be conservationists and collaborate.
Thanks, Merlin. We've got just a couple minutes left. I do just want to invite you guys again to join MTBC as a member. There's merlintuttle.org, obviously, as our website. I'm staring at the screen. But we will share updates on any of Merlin's, any opportunities to hear more Merlin's stories or any publications, and any of these resources all will be shared with our members, and that's the easiest way to keep up to date with Merlin and his work. Merlin, do you have any closing words? We got 2 minutes left.
I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate our master naturalists and their dedication to helping people understand nature and its value and needs. We have tremendous challenges in our state. Not that we have more than other states, but we certainly have our share. And bats are just one example of the many groups of animals that are in serious jeopardy because of human misunderstanding that only we are likely to resolve.
What a great way to wrap up that entire sentiment. Merlin and the Master Naturalist program could not do without conservation champions such as yourself that dedicate a lifetime to those same practices of continuously educating and inspiring others.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your presentation this morning and for sharing all of that passion and resources and knowledge. And then thank you, Teresa, for answering questions seamlessly in the Q&A, providing all of those links and resources. There were a lot of questions this morning, so thank you for managing all of that. With that, in the last minute, just wanted to say thank you one more time for all of our master naturalists that are joining us, or all of our attendees. It is 10 o'clock, and so our next series of sessions are starting. You can navigate back to the online event guide. Make sure you leave this event to navigate back to the online event guide, and then join the WebEx for your next event that you're going to attend this morning. And then a big virtual round of applause for Merlin again. Thank you guys so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
And then please tell Paula we all said hello as well.
Great, we will.
All right, well, with that, thank you guys. And then we're going to get started. We do have a 10 o'clock session that's going to get started here in just a second on this channel. All right, so Merlin, you're going to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
You're going to stop sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to click out of this?
You can either press the red X or you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay. Are we going to get a copy of this?
Yes, sir. This was recorded and we will send you a copy of the recording.
Great. Great. Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I hope you get a chance to use some of those goodies that we sent you if Paula didn't steal them.
Good. Thank you.
All right, Michelle, our next speaker on the for this 10 o'clock session for the track 6 is Sarah Mixon,
yeah.
Old Mixon. All right, great.
And so I just need screen sharing capabilities and we should be good to go.
One second, Sarah.
Problem.
Sarah, you have 2 content host volunteers. They're going to help manage your Q&A for you today. We have Lois Ponder and Mary Warwick, and they're going to get you started introducing you and then helping to manage that timing at the end.
Great. Can I go ahead and put up my intro screen there?
Yes, ma'am. Kick it off.
All right.
Sarah, this is Mary. I just wanted to let you know this is what the sound is going to be like when I chime the bells at 11:45. And that means we just have a few minutes left for questions.
Sounds great. Well, let's go ahead and kick off because the video is 25 minutes. So I think we'll want to get started right away if we are going to try to wrap up for Q&A by that point. Are we good to go or do we need to do some housekeeping?
No, you're good to go. And Mary, she's going to run until 10:45 or until